Today, I'm joined by someone whose story is powerful, heartfelt, and deeply human. Wendy B Correa is a memoir author who has lived through experiences that would break many people, yet she's found a way to transform the pain into strength, perspective, and hope. Her upcoming memoir shares her journey through childhood trauma, addiction, loss, adversity, and ultimately a long, hard won path towards healing. What stands out about Wendy is the honesty with which she speaks about her life, not to shock, but to connect, to help others feel less alone, and to show that healing is possible even after the darkest chapters. Wendy brings a voice shaped by resilience, reflection, and genuine desire to help others understand that if their past does not have to define their future, her perspective is courageous, insightful, and rooted in lived experience. Wendy, I'm really grateful for you coming on the podcast today. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Lee, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for giving my pretty baby and me a voice.
Absolute pleasure. Take us back to the beginning. Where did your journey start for yourself?
Well, I would say the first defining trauma in my life was when my father died when I was 7 years old. And back then, people didn't seem to understand that children needed to help with their grief. They needed to be
Yeah.
educated about dying, and especially when it's a parent. And so I felt quite alone watching the adults sort of going through the motions. And, um, it wasn't until my 20s I could tell you about it in an acting class in Los Angeles that I finally got in touch with this grief and sadness and loss that I had never been able to process. So that was the very first trauma. And then a few years later, my mom brought into our family a man who would become my stepfather about 3 years later. And he was mentally ill and had alcoholism issues and violence. And so I grew up in a home where I was not safe. And, but he could also be quite charming and fun and adventurous. So it was very confusing. And you never knew what was going to set him off. Something really tiny, something
Yeah.
ridiculous. And he would just go into a violent rage and threaten to kill everyone. So that is sort of the beginning, but also I had two siblings. One was 7 years older than me, and one was 12 years older than me. And I always thought that it was the age difference that made them sort of emotionally unavailable to me. They didn't seem to even care about me. They weren't the doting, siblings who would play games with me and read to me or, fix my hair or any of that. They seemed to kind of disdain me. And so I grew up really feeling that my mother was the only person in my family who actually loved me. She was very loving and affectionate, but unfortunately, she was also neglectful because she, allowed me to be in the presence of my stepdad, who was a violent alcoholic. And that is truly just sort of the beginning of the.
Yeah, that's a lot to go through for somebody so young at any age there as well. How did you manage to cope when you've got like a stepfather like that that's that abusive?
Well, I didn't know what it was called, of course, but I learned to dissociate
Yeah,
at a very young age, probably at my father's funeral. I do remember, the room was filled with the stench of carnations and just seeing my father lying in his coffin all waxy, and I sort of like left my body and flew to the ceiling. And that
yeah,
was kind of the first time that I sort of left my body. And so I was dissociating from the time of my father's death. And then, with my stepdad, he sort of modeled for me. He was a drinker. And so, I got drunk when I was 10 years old. I wanted to see why he drank. And, it made me numb. And thought,
right.
the numbness, I don't have to feel the sadness and the loneliness and the scary feelings. But when my stepdad came into our family, then I was, in fight or flight constantly. was I was always on high alert and was for many, many years around him. So as a kid back in the 70s, there was plenty of drugs and I partook of drinking and marijuana and LSD and smoking. And that was, what I did to try to not feel the pain. But I also had a very deep sense of survival. Somehow, there was a voice that would say to me, this is not on you. This is the adults or this is your stepdad, and you're not at fault here. But as a child, we don't have the developmental maturity to really understand that. So instead, we kind of internalize, well, wait a minute, if he's like saying that he's going to kill me, I must have done something wrong. It must be my fault. So I grappled with that for many, many years, feeling like somehow I created this horrible family situation that,
Yeah.
if I would just leave, then maybe my mom would be okay. And of course, I was codependent on my mom. I was a child, and
Yeah.
my mother was a codependent to my stepdad. She did not
Yeah.
drink, but she had her own trauma. And I wouldn't learn for many decades that she had been sexually assaulted as a child on numerous occasions by a neighbor. And, she was in her 70s before she shared that with me. So that was sort of the beginning of unraveling what happened to my family. I say my pretty baby is an autopsy of my family because I started, to peel apart the layers of the trauma in my family and the generational trauma. And I knew, that she had been sexually assaulted. So I knew that colored how she interacted with the world.
Yeah.
She
Definitely.
held that secret her whole life. And so her relationships with men in particular were clouded by
Yeah.
that experience. So it wasn't until I left home at 17 and went to college and started studying psychology and that I could start to understand more about what happened in my family. It took me years and years, really, to sort of peel back the layers and uncover a number of family secrets that contributed to the dysfunction. And so my pretty baby sort of takes the reader with me as I am the investigator and
Yeah.
really digging into my family to find this all out. So, and in the meantime, I had a very strong sense that I wanted to survive, that I deserved to survive, that I
Yeah.
needed to survive. So when I left home in the Midwest and I got myself into college in California in the West Coast, I immediately started to seek out ways to heal myself. That included studying Buddhism and meditation and nature. I started backpacking and going in nature. And I started studying Native American spirituality and I got sober. What my book is like a guidebook for other people that may just beginning a healing journey and they don't know
Yeah.
where to start. And so I
Yeah.
hope that it is like a guidebook where people can read about like all the things that I did to heal myself. You know how they say it takes a village. Well, I used the entire village and I went to therapy and, writing and nature and meditation and Native American spirituality and Buddhism, all of it. I had to use all of that to heal. And so if someone, reads my book and they're inspired to try any one of those, then that would make my heart happy. So
Of course. What age were you when you realised that you needed to make changes? That the way your life was, things are not right. Something's got to change.
Well, even, at home, when I was still at home and it was violent and scary. And, even in my home life, the town where I grew up was a very industrial town. There was a lot of unemployment and people drank. There was domestic violence. A lot of the friends that I had were like in a street gang. And blue collar, nobody I knew was planning to go to college. And I just felt like if I stay here, I'll die. This is not. So, I mean, I always had this feeling that I needed to sort of escape. And then when I went to college, I had also there wasn't a lot of culture in my home. I didn't learn about art, or I had never been to a library even. I didn't have books. We never went to the theater. I had never been to a, you know, never been to a museum unless it was, a field trip with school. And so when I got to college, I was just like a dry sponge. I wanted to learn everything. And I piled on the classes, and I wound up getting 2 degrees because since my father had died when I was young, I got what is called Social Security and veterans benefits here in the US, and that helped me to pay for college. And I was able to go to college 1 additional year and continue studying. And I wanted nothing more than to stay in college and keep learning. So I wound up getting 2 degrees. And then, in the healing process, I would take 2 steps forward and 1 step back. I mean, it was still
Yeah.
drinking and doing drugs and, learning and deepening my spirituality, but still, I'd still use drugs because I wasn't addressing the pain.
Yeah.
I was just trying to cover up the pain of my family. And it wasn't until I moved eventually to Los Angeles, and I enrolled in a master's program in clinical psychology that required the students to also go through therapy. If you were going to become a therapist, they wanted you to also go through therapy. And that's when I really started to peel apart more of the layers of the dysfunction of my family, and to understand that losing a parent at 7 years of age is a tremendous trauma
Oh,
to a
devastating.
to a child. No one had ever said that to me. It took a therapist to say, "This is a tremendous, trauma." And, it was that sort of in combination with, I got arrested for a DUI, and I was thrown in jail, and I had court-ordered AA meetings, and I started going to AA and getting sober and working with a therapist. And I also started practicing Native American spirituality by going into what are called sweat lodges, and I did a vision quest. All of that combined, it was like I just kept trying more and more things that would heal me. And, so the therapy helped me to really understand that what happened in my home was not normal, was not healthy, and
Yeah.
that it would take time. And I may have, a few steps forward and a few steps back. And I did
Yeah.
get sober, but then after a year of sobriety, I drank again, and then I had to get sober again. So my book sort of outlines my struggles, that it wasn't just a linear path. It wasn't
No,
just like,
no.
yay, I did this and I was completely healed
No.
forever. It was a daily, to this day, I know that a lot of I'm 38 years sober now. But for my mental health, for my central nervous system, I know that I will have to continue to stay sober. I will continue with the meditation and taking care of my central nervous system and being in nature and surrounding myself with only healthy people and only surrounding myself with people that bring out the best in me. And, obviously I've learned a lot of things. I've raised a son who's 29, who's a fabulous human being, and I've had to learn a lot along the way. And as I was writing My Pretty Baby, I realized at first, I started, this was for me, for my catharsis. I wasn't even really contemplating publishing. I just needed to write it out and
Yeah.
write my story. And as I was working with an editor, at one point she said to me, "You are going to publish, right?" And I was like, "Am I?" So that was, well, and then I realized, this is not just my memoir. This is everybody's story. This is, we know now there's a lot more research on adverse childhood experiences, it's
Yeah.
called. And we now know that like 64% of adults have some kind of adverse childhood experience. And so I realized that My Pretty Baby is a call to action, that we need to be able to talk about um, childhood trauma without
Yeah.
shame. And
Yeah.
we need to talk about this openly in order to heal. And all you have to do is look around at our society to see there's a lot of healing that needs to be done. And I believe, we have taken some steps towards being able to speak about mental health without a stigma. It's amazing to me that it's taken us till 2025 to be able to understand that it isn't something that we have to, feel embarrassed about, that we're human beings. And of course, we make mistakes. And for me, I also want people to be able to look at the people that raised them, because, and this generational trauma that keeps getting passed down unless you decide that you're the cycle breaker and that's it.
Yeah.
The trauma ends with me and I'm going to heal myself and I am not passing this on. And in fact, I want to educate other people and help them to find their own path to healing.
What would you think was the turning point for yourself? Was it when you first started having therapy, do you think?
Yes, that was definitely, I mean, getting thrown in jail, that was a big wake up call.
Yeah. I mean, when
And
that happened to you, did you sort of think, how did it come to this, or what am I doing here?
of course, I mean, I cried. I, always wanted to be the good girl, because I didn't want to draw attention to myself because of the home I grew up in. I wanted to be invisible. I wanted to hide. I wanted to protect myself. And, for me to be arrested and thrown in jail and then to have court-ordered AA meetings and, I couldn't drive except to go to work, to AA meetings and the grocery store. But what I want to say is in my book, it isn't all doom and gloom because these incredible experiences, I started having all of these incredible experiences related to the music industry because I got into the music
Yeah.
industry eventually and was an activist. And but what I wanted to say about my first AA meeting is that I was in the music industry at the time, and I had been partying with a band, the Thompson Twins,
Great in the
s- uh,
80s.
on Sunset Boulevard at
Mm.
Sushi on Sunset. And I should have stayed with my friend who was staying in Le Mondrian Hotel. But no, I attempted to drive home when I got arrested. I got my hands on a list of AA meetings that were specifically for people in the music industry. So to go to my very first one in West LA, I showed up and I stood outside, smoking a cigarette and just terrified because I didn't know what to expect. And I walked in, and here comes this gentleman walking up to me, extending his hand, and with this big, wonderful smile that I recognized. And he said, "Hello, my name is Richard." And I thought, okay, your name might be Richard. In my head, I didn't say this to him, but it's also Ringo. What? I mean, Ringo Starr is welcoming me to my first AA meeting, and his beautiful wife, Barbara Bach, was with
Barbara,
him.
oh, yeah,
And
so lovely.
also, right? So, and of course, it's well known that they are sober for decades. So I'm not revealing anything that isn't public knowledge, but
Cool.
and people shouldn't expect that Ringo is going to greet them at their first meeting. It just
No,
so
no.
happened I was in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
But I sat there in the meeting and looking at Ringo and saying, if Ringo Starr can get sober, then I can get sober. If Barbara Bach can get sober, then I can get sober. And so I had these incredible experiences of, um, just magnificently famous, internationally famous superstars that touched me in a way. And it was just a very short and brief encounter, but it was enough to help me to get and stay sober. And I also had a wonderful friend, Boyd Elder, who was a fabulous artist, and he did a lot of album covers, especially for like the Eagles. And he took me to meet a lot of his extremely famous people and friends. And one day, and I was working in a restaurant. I was covered in barbecue sauce and had been, waitressing all day. And he came to pick me up to say he wanted to take me to a friend's house. And so I was game, but as we're driving up Pacific Coast Highway towards Malibu and into the Malibu colony, I was like, wait, who am I meeting? Where are we going? Do I, I'm all sweaty. Do I have any makeup on? And he
Yeah.
says, she doesn't care what you look like. And I'm like, who is she? Who is she? Boyd. And it was Joni Mitchell.
Joni Mitchell.
Joni Mitchell. And so Boyd took me to Joni Mitchell's house, and she was so lovely to me. And I had at least a half a dozen different times that I got to spend with her. And I was a nobody. I mean, I was just
Yeah,
somebody
yeah.
that worked in the music industry. I worked for Geffen Records by that time in A&R, and Joni just treated me like there was like we were sisters. She was just so kind and loving, and she saw something in me. And so that was the reason that I write about that in My Pretty Baby, is because it illustrates that your kindness towards a stranger, you just never know how
Yeah.
that kindness might affect them.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Joni didn't have to be kind to me. She just was. And
Yeah.
for this, icon, the most important singer songwriter of a generation,
Definitely. Yeah.
to be just sweet and gentle and kind to a young gal who, was not famous. And it just showed her extraordinary humanity. And so that was just another instance at a time that I was struggling with sobriety, and struggling to feel like I was a lovable person,
Yeah.
struggling to find my place in the world. And for her to be so kind and loving towards me really impacted me tremendously.
It must have give you added encouragement that it's not just like, I mean, when we're so desperate for somebody to be kind and nice to us, when we've suffered like abusive upbringings, you take it from anywhere. But when you get somebody that's like a household name, a legend like Joni Mitchell, Ringo, and they're super kind to you, it must give you that added extra incentive that you must be worth something. It gives you something to work with.
Yes, that is exactly it. And that's exactly why I talk about those stories, because they were, you know, um, I mean, with Joni, there were more encounters, but later I talk about when I did get sober. I left LA and I moved to Aspen, Colorado. I was a DJ on KSPN FM, and I became an assistant to the gonzo journalist Hunter S. Thompson.
Yeah,
So do you know him?
of course. Yeah.
Good. Okay, because
Fear and
some
Loathing in
people,
Las Vegas.
yes, some people don't know who
That was
Hunter is.
crazy.
He was, and what was fabulous is that by the time I went to work with him, I was sober. I didn't smoke. I didn't really care much about politics or sports. I didn't
Yeah.
know anything about cars, and he was all about all of that. He
Yeah.
did. So it was funny because I was completely sober, but I tell that story because Again, even though Hunter was kind of out of his mind and with substance abuse, and he was so very kind to me. He was so kind to me, and he was generous and loving towards me, and we it was not a romantic relationship at all. I was just wanting a job with a writer,
Yeah.
and but I had to go to sleep at night, and I didn't snort cocaine, so I couldn't stay up all night with him, and he knew that I was sober, so he never offered me any of the substances. The only thing that he ever offered was, "Hey, do you wanna go blow something up?" And that was, like, his thing, like, he would go and, like, shoot guns and blow things up, and I had to say, "No, Hunter, I'm really not interested in doing that." But I also bring him up because, again, here is a man who has this notorious reputation, and has he hurt people in his life? Yes, I'm sure. His ex-wife and his son, and, he's had many relationships, and, you know, I don't really know all the ins and out of his personal life. All I can speak to is his relationship with me, and that it really touched me. And again, he it made me feel like I was worthy, and that I was lovable, and that I was smart, and that's why it's important for me to have written it in the book, because it's part of my journey.
Yeah. And how did you find actually writing that part of the story down, those memories coming back to you after all those years?
How did I
I
find
feel
them?
because you know when you start writing, all these memories come back, and often they're memories you've not thought about in that depth for such a long time. So when you had all of these memories come back, how did that feel? Where did that take you to?
Well, luckily for the majority of my book, I was working with a therapist, and she was using tools with me, for instance, EMDR,
Yeah,
eye movement
yeah,
desensitization. So I needed help to process that trauma, and EMDR worked fabulously with me. And then she used another technique I'd never heard of before called IMTT, image transformation therapy. It's more of a guided imagery, and another way to process um, trauma. Um, Gently as opposed to, jarringly. So I did that, but also I might mention, when I first moved to Los Angeles, I was studying acting, and I was in an acting class. We were studying Stanislavski and doing a
yeah,
sense memory class. And we had to recreate a childhood memory by using sight, sound, touch, taste, hearing. And that was when I was trying to recreate one of the best memories that I had of my father being in the backyard with him. And he picked this beautiful red ripe strawberry out of the garden and popped it into my mouth. And so I thought that I was recreating this beautiful memory, but in the class, as I was describing it, I had these feelings bubbling up that didn't match this sweet memory that I'm trying to recreate. And it's roiling inside of me. And my teacher says to me, "Speak to him, speak to him." I didn't know how to speak to my dead father, and I didn't know what to say. And he kept saying, "Tell him what you're feeling." And it burst out of me like a hose that had been kinked.
yeah, of course, yeah,
I'm mad at you for dying. I'm
yeah,
mad at
yeah,
you. And I had no idea that I was mad at my father. I was
yeah,
sad, but I didn't know I was mad. Well, of course I was mad, because if he hadn't died, I wouldn't have had a violent alcoholic stepdad.
yeah.
And this teacher was phenomenal and said, um, "Wow, that was tremendous work that you did. Be gentle on yourself. These are feelings that have come up that you didn't even know were there." I mean, this was in an acting class. I mean, it was like a therapy class. And so years later, especially as I was writing my memoir, I used that technique for recreating the scenes in my book so that my book is very cinematic. I mean, it could be a movie because it's very, you want to zip the reader up in your body with you so they feel like they're right there. And I did that through using the techniques of the sense memory of remembering something that happened from my past by recreating the room. What did I see? But even like the grain of the wood, really
Yeah.
microscopically. What do you smell? Do you smell alcohol on somebody's
Yeah.
breath? Do you smell honeysuckle? What is the texture? Is it soft? Is something rough? And I recreated I brought up a lot of my memories from my childhood by using those techniques. And that is something a lot of people ask, how did you remember these details? And I think I've always remembered everything. I think I do remember a lot, maybe things that I wish I didn't. So I do have a good memory, but I think that exercise really did enhance
Yeah, I
my
think so
ability.
because it's brought a lot of those suppressed memories to the surface there. Yeah,
Yes.
and for me, it tends to be more often than not, it's a good thing there as well because it helps you to often process it and just to, like in therapy, you talk something through that helps you. You might just need one conversation and that's enough, but you've moved on from it because you've managed to get it off your chest, get it out for the first time, probably forever.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. I highly recommend therapy with a therapist, obviously, who has trauma informed training. And that has been remarkable and so helpful for me on and off for decades, actually.
And do you find yourself, even now, years later, still a work in progress, still on the road, no, on that journey with no destination, just trying to improve every day on yourself?
Yes, and especially because of the trauma, and the being on high alert, my
Yeah.
central nervous system really needs a lot of tender, loving care. And, I need quiet time and rest. And, I need to be in healthy situations. And, it's really important, kind of a daily practice. I still meditate and study Buddhism and spend as much time in nature as I can. I go to yoga and obviously still doing and writing, and still practice sobriety as well. And I will. It's a project until the day I die.
Yeah. Yeah. So the book's out. Where can people get the book? All the usual places?
Uh, Everywhere, wherever you get books. And since you're in the UK, I can't wait to hear where people will get it in the UK. It's so here she is, my pretty baby.
I
And
love it. I love it.
there she is. That is me. I think I invented the mullet. If you can see my
Can see it's very,
my
very
hair,
advanced.
and I cut my own hair. I invented the mullet. But the book is available. My distributor is Simon and Schuster, and so you
Yeah.
should be able to get it wherever books are sold. At your favorite indie bookstore, at Barnes and Noble, Simon and Schuster, Amazon, and and again, your
And we'll
bookshop.
have the link for your book in the description for the episode as well.
Great,
YouTube and
fabulous. And
all
people
the other platforms.
can find me. They can look on my website, www.wendy B as in boy, Correa. And I'm also Wendy B Correa on Instagram and Wendy Correa on Facebook.
That's brilliant. Wendy, it has been so interesting listening to your story, your journey, how you overcome everything. Obviously, the people that you met that really helped put you on your journey there as well, and for the strength that you've got. And 38 years sober is just absolutely amazing. There, absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me and giving my pretty baby a voice. And my deepest wish is that my pretty baby will get into the hands of the people who need it most, which is actually everyone.
Yeah,
Thank you.
definitely. Thank you.